Bruce Campbell joins us now from Stonecastle Asset Management for the Stonecastle Asset Management Weekly Cannabis Update. Bruce, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Bruce, it's an action-packed week in the cannabis space, though not necessarily on the stock side. Let's start with the departure of Mr. Terry Booth, the founder and CEO of Aurora Cannabis. How does that influence your impression of what's ahead for Aurora and the cannabis sector more broadly?
Well, if you look at, this has been a pretty consistent theme here now. Really, Bruce Linton was the first to go, but we've seen it, continually across the board. You can look at, Supreme, you can look at Weed MD, now, Aurora, and it seems like, the visionaries that started these businesses are now, being asked or being pushed aside in order for management that's coming in that's probably going to be a little bit more fiscally responsible, I think, one, and two is probably going to have a vision of profitability in the shorter term than they've had. So the rumors about Terry Booth have been circulating for, probably, I would say over 6 months now. And I think, obviously what really probably got the ball rolling for a lot of these boards is that, once you see one or two companies doing it, then, hey, you feel like you can probably do it as well. So it's, it's not, I guess, too surprising when I read the headlines yesterday, or I got some messages from people saying that the rumor was that he was going to be asked to resign or retire, then I wasn't too surprised.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that the raft of layoffs and CEO departures is indicative of a continuing fundamental weakness in the sector due to an overbuild of capacity?
Yeah, I mean, that certainly seems to be the case, right? I mean, all of these companies were ramping up and hiring, and they really couldn't get employees fast enough if you go back a year ago. And fast forward to now, and it seems like it's gone from being absolute euphoria to complete depression. And it probably lies somewhere in the middle for the majority of the companies, but I think now they're taking the opportunity to just rationalize and say, like, look, like let's clean house and rationalize and cut people that maybe aren't necessarily needed at this point in time. Maybe we add them back down the road, but we need to be fiscally responsible. We're burning through too much cash and we can't raise it anymore, and so we need to make changes. Mm-hmm.
Right. So do you think that this is going to ultimately be a good thing for the sector?
Well, I mean, the one thing that you look at, and this is, not just the cannabis sector, but, really any company, that typically the entrepreneur that starts the company isn't ultimately the, CEO who is the execution person at the company. Quite often the CEO will stay on, or the founder will stay on as a chairman, and, provide sort of strategic big picture thinking, but they don't typically operate the companies. It's not sort of the same skill set to be, super entrepreneurial and coming up with, concepts and then, sort of digging down and operating. And so it probably is good for the sector in that, we've got to a place now where we have overcapacity. There's going to be way more cannabis produced in the next, probably in 24 months than we can use here in Canada. Obviously, the prices are going to compress. And, now obviously the big thing is to move into these 2.0 products and to move probably beyond Canada. And so, a CEO that comes in that's probably more well-heeled in business management and execution and operations is probably going to be a better fit for shareholders now than that entrepreneur who had the, sort of big idea.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, now we've got Doug Ford, who's sort of making some noise about LPs in Ontario. What's going on with him?
Well, there's been actually a fair bit in Ontario that's going on. One of the announcements, and this didn't have to do with Doug Ford, but they talked about this farm gate, which was initially everyone was quite excited about. When you sort of read the details, well, no, they could sell from their cultivation facility, but it first had to be sold to Ontario Cannabis, and then it could be sold through there. So it's just kind of like a middleman that gets in the way. So that was one thing. But Doug Ford was out talking about, all the criticism that there's been on Ontario and the fact that the retail locations are way behind everyone else. And he's basically said, like, hey, you guys all need to cool your jets here because, we're going to have more retail locations than anywhere else across the country by the end of the year. So, everybody back off. And that is what's needed. I mean, if you look at the 2.0 sales so far, edibles in most places are selling out in in record time. I was with an LP on Wednesday, and they were talking about some of the channel checks that they've done, and some of the edibles, especially the gummies, are going in like 2 hours. So if they show up at a location, people are waiting in line knowing that they're going to show up on a certain day, and they're all sold out within a couple of hours. So that's exactly what we need. Is we need Doug Ford to to step up and get well beyond the, I think, 24 locations that there are now, and get into the hundreds, and then get retail distribution. And that's what's going to probably solve a lot of the issues for the LPs as far as cash flow and earnings.
Right. Well, that's interesting. Now, do you think Ontario is going to sort of be able to solve the revenue issues of most LPs who are dominant there? And how do you juxtapose the Ontario market to one like Massachusetts or Illinois?
Yeah, so I don't think it's going to solve the problem for every single LP, because there's always going to be winners and losers, and there's going to be some companies that just weren't built for this environment where you see cost pressure and consolidation. But that being said, I mean, there's always a market for high end and low end, and just like if we looked at the wine or beer market, there's wine that's sold out of a box that's super cheap that appeals to a certain market, and there's super rare expensive bottles that are for a specific market, and everything kind of in between. And if you build your LP to factor into that different niche, and you have your specific niche and you know what it is, then you should be okay. Does opening everything up solve all of the problems for all the LPs? Of course not. It certainly will help the industry, and it will drive higher sales, but then you're going to see, just based on, supply and demand and efficiency, who's the winners and losers. If you were to compare it to, something like Massachusetts, like, I mean, if you look at that market, that's only been legal rec here for a year now, and they've already seen, about $500 million in sales, which, if you think about where Canada is, we're run rate right now probably 1.3 to 1.5 billion annually. So, there's only 7 million people in Massachusetts versus what there are in Canada. So, obviously we can see a lot higher sales if we get the retail distribution. If you compare that obviously to the population of Ontario, that population is just a little bit less than what we're seeing in Ontario, and so you could see sales in Ontario in sort of that $600-700 million range, and obviously if we get to the 5 billion that everyone's projecting, then they probably is even higher in Ontario.
Yeah, you bet. All right, Bruce. Well, that's a great update as per usual. We'll leave it there for now and come back to you next week. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys.